Hey everybody, Ian here, and I'm here with Neil and Dana from Drastic Plastic Records. Thanks so much for doing this, for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
You bet. I've been so curious to talk to you because I've got several Drastic Plastic records in my collection. Certainly nowhere near all of them because there's a lot of them, but there's some of my most cherished records. And when I got these records, I kind of looked into it and saw, oh wow, it's a record store in Omaha that branched out into reissues, and I just thought that was such a cool story, and I'm just really curious to hear more about it. My understanding is the record store started back in 1982.
Correct.
Yeah, and then according to Discogs, at least, the very first reissue was in 2006 that Drastic Plastic has its name on. Does that sound right? The Briggs, the band
Yes.
The Briggs. Yeah.
Yeah, let me explain how it all came about. So, in 1982, our owner, Mike Howard, moved here from, he's kind of lived all over the country prior to moving here. He was, I think, in his mid-20s when he did. And he opened Drastic Plastic as kind of a punk rock, not kind of, it was a punk rock store here in Omaha. It's kind of a funny story. He was looking, he and his brother owned a record store in Kansas City, and they were looking to, he was looking to do his own thing. I guess that's the easiest way to put it. And his girlfriend at the time happened to be from Omaha. So they came up here and they spent a weekend with her parents. And that's where the idea for Drastic germinated, because in that weekend, John Cale was playing at a venue here. This would have been like 1981, maybe. John Cale was playing at a venue. The Decline of Western Civilization was playing at the Downtown Cinema. And there was one other thing that suggested to him that this town was ripe for a sort of alternative record store. The record stores that we had were, we had an independent one that was fairly large, but it still was sort of a mainstream thing. And then of course there were the corporate record stores, and a healthy amount of used record stores, but still dealing mostly in classic rock and contemporary music. So he moved up here and he realized that John Cale doesn't usually come through Omaha, and he was a little premature in opening this thing, but he did it, and it became the alternative, weird, sort of edgy store for years and years. At some point, he really wanted to push the envelope and expand out into other musical things. One of which was the most profitable, was licensing and screen printing T-shirts for bands. And we are now very involved with our part of the company is very involved with that part of the business. It's called Impact Merchandising. But at the time, it was really relegated to tour, and the alternative, independent, very non-corporate music at the time in the early 80s and mid 80s was industrial music, punk rock, and then the burgeoning second wave ska. So he developed a very healthy business supplying tour merchandise for some of those bands. For example, probably the most prominent and one that he did was a very successful partnership was with the Toasters. So so we fast forward, the T-shirt business evolved into licensing rather than just providing for tour. And in 2006, that Toasters relationship crept up again. The Toasters were going on tour, and there was this younger band called the Briggs that was opening for them. Gotcha, so the first two DPR releases were created not with the idea of creating a whole label, though that wasn't too far in the back of our minds, but primarily to provide merchandise for that tour, Toasters and Briggs.
Gotcha. And looked like Briggs came out. Looks like the Briggs came out first in 2006, and the Toasters came out in 2007. It was like a 25th anniversary.
Yep.
It was like a compilation.
Yes, it was a compilation. A lot of their hits. I don't know if that's the right word, but a best of.
Gotcha. So gotcha. So Drastic Plastic kind of got its feet wet a little bit with that. And then what led to then in 2010, I counted on Discogs at least 10 new reissues that came out in 2010, 10 different titles. And so like what happened in those intervening couple of years?
Okay, so I came on around, I think 2006 or 2007. And in essence, it was my initial job was to repurpose, redevelop the record store itself, because it was really struggling with Napster, and it had been struggling because of the big boxes in the 90s had gotten so deep into the catalog and stuff like that. So Mike and I put our heads together in order to save the store, which was doing so little revenue compared to this t-shirt thing that was really taking off. So we did it. We sort of reinvested a lot of the money that was coming into sort of alternative clothing products, something that we could really capitalize on because we're in a very touristy part of Omaha. So a big thing was like Nebraska, sort of funny, irreverent Nebraska theme, Nebraska and Omaha themed t-shirts and stuff like that. So once that sort of leveled off and was self-sustainable, we just started having meetings in our off hours of how we could do the label. I actually came from book publishing in New York City. So the licensing and developing of inventory product for sale at a wholesale level was not unfamiliar to me. And obviously through the t-shirts, it was not unfamiliar with Mike. So, but neither one of us had any experience in the recording business. So we just sort of got together at this bar a couple times a week and sort of figured out how we would do it. Because those first two releases, Rob Hingley from the Toasters really held our hands on how to do that. And some of it we didn't even touch. So we went to this bar. It was a blues bar that doesn't exist here anymore called McKenna's. And it was definitely in its last hours. Nobody went there, which is why we loved it. And their staff was so inexperienced. We would order single malt scotches and they would serve them in tumbler glasses, neat, but they would fill them all the way up to the top. So we love that place. And you can see why they didn't stay in business. But that's when we figured it all out and just started. At that point, we started developing our relationships with the major labels, which didn't really happen in 2010 yet. That came a little bit later. But we also developed relationships with some independent elements, one of them being Factory Benelux, where a lot of those early records were some of the fantastic factory releases that weren't sort of the major Joy Division or New Order. You know, it was like Section 25 and many others. And another independent label that we worked with was Cherry Red, hence the early exploited titles.
Yeah.
So we kind of worked our way through.
And did you come up with sort of like lists? Like, I'm curious how you sort of started contacting people. Did you come up with like lists of releases you'd like to do first? Or did you come up with lists of labels you'd like to contact first? Or how did that, you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
Like how did you start approaching it?
We came up with those lists. I can't even explain to you how long and detailed those lists were. I mean, pages and pages and pages in notebooks divided by rights holders. And then they got even longer when we started to get into the major labels. That's where Mike, our owner, was incredibly knowledgeable and fantastic. He'd been working on the retail side of the record industry and record stores since he was old enough to hold a job. So he is now in his late 60s. So his knowledge went pretty far back, and he has an incredible, almost what do they call that? The memory when you have what?
Savant.
Yeah, he's like a savant with his memory. So he can tell you not only what major labels bought over the years the independent labels, but he
Sure.
can tell you any record that you would perhaps name at random, its history of where it went and how it's existed and who owns it now. So he was terrific at that. And he was the one that sort of took the ball on coming up with those lists. But because we weren't known, and because so many of these independent artists have been screwed out of their money for so many years, it was hard to talk to people. And then when we talked to them, it was hard to convince them that we were decent people.
Yep.
Just trying to do a decent job. And then, most artists, when you're dealing with the artists or you're dealing with an independent label, they really want to make sure that you're going to create and be able to sell a really good product. And so there was that hurdle as well. So some of the deals early on were mostly because these were the people who would give us a shot. Factory Benelux, for example, and Cherry Red.
Gotcha. And so, like, just to list a few highlights from that first big year of 2010, the Meatmen, Motorhead, Agent Orange, the Exploited, like you mentioned. And then what for me is one of the sort of crown jewels in my collection is the classic, the Clash's first record, cut by Kevin Gray, which it sounds just insanely good. This is one of those records where, like, you put it on, you drop the needle, and you just cannot believe what is happening in your ears. Like, this is something I imagine was kind of like a lousy sounding record, honestly, because I knew it from 80s CDs and stuff, and then I put this on, and it just was transformative. And so a lot of your releases have really great mastering, and this one I believe was pressed at RTI. Like, it's something that obviously you seem to prioritize, and was that coming from your end? Was that coming from the bands of the labels, or what was behind the idea of, like, just doing it in such high quality?
Okay, so I mean, I'm glad you mentioned those other two. The Agent Orange we did was a deal with Robbie Fields, who owned Posh Boy Records. That was a good example of an independent release. And then the Meatmen was with Tesco V directly. And he's a super funny, super sweet guy. His music is no longer PC. The new PC world doesn't really invite Tesco V into it. But to answer your question about quality, so we always wanted them to sound good, but it took us a while. Once we were on the other end of being the for making to sort of figure out exactly how that was going to work. And that record that you put up, that was our first major label release or deal with a major label, Sony. And they were instrumental in helping explain to us exactly what constituted a remaster versus a re-engineered sound, what could be done when you had original tapes, what could be done with high-res digital, and how you could get sort of the best bang for your buck. And it was because of the success. I mean, in terms of success, I mean, in this context, the absolute fantastic sound we got out of that record by going with Kevin Gray and going through RTI, that we decided that was the direction we wanted to go in. We wanted to do high-end, best sounding possible, cool audiophile vinyl for the music that we were passionate about, which is primarily, 70s and 80s punk and post-punk, with some exceptions. So it was really that record. And then that record, I think, came out in 2009, right about the time the recession hit. So we did a large amount of those records because it was the Clash, but that sort of set us back a little bit. It was a couple of years then before we could put out our next record, because we had so much of our limited funds tied up in that. And we did the second Clash record, Give 'Em Enough Rope. And then a little bit later, we did the 10-inch singles. Yes, Black Market Clash. So super proud of those records. And that also was the beginning of our relationship with Kevin. And that has been a really great relationship for us. I like Kevin enormously.
Yeah.
And if you go visit him, he'll take you to make him take you to either the Italian restaurant or the Thai restaurant. He knows all the best restaurants in his little corner of the world.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I got to talk to him a couple weeks ago. It was such a huge thrill, and was just really impressed with how just ego-less he is. Just super level-headed, down-to-earth guy, even though he's one of the best in the world at what he does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you get a chance to ask him about what's that thing he's got a bugaboo about? It's Half Speed Master. Did you ask him about Half Speed Master?
I didn't bring it up just because I've seen him talk about it online, so I kind of knew his deal that he's not a fan.
He's passionately not a fan. It's pretty
exactly. Yeah, so that's interesting, because I was curious. I did notice that 2010 you put out approximately 10 releases. 2011 then there were 6 releases. 2012 there were 3 releases. And then it wasn't until 2013, 2014 that there was a lot more releases. And it sounds like it was because a lot of your money was tied up in, and according to Discogs, you pressed 5,000 pieces of each of these, which a dozen years ago was a lot. I mean, now that would sell out immediately probably, but back then it probably took you a few years before you sold a significant amount of those, I imagine.
Yes. Well, they were good sellers, but it's when you're dealing with a business that deals in a lot of inventory, it's always nice to have those tent poles that people can build orders around. So the Clash was definitely one of those. Another major label release we did later on that was another really good one like the Clash was the Cramps.
Yes.
Through Universal.
Yeah, so and then in 2011, I believe you put out a bunch of birthday party albums.
We did. That was directly with the band.
So that involved like that was sort of your first contact, is like, let's get a hold of these guys and see if they're game.
Yeah, well, we did t-shirts for the birthday party. So we had a contact through that end of things. And Mick Harvey primarily is the band member from the birthday party that primarily handles their business stuff. So it was just a conversation with Mick Harvey, and again, convincing him that we were going to do right by him and we were going to do right by the records. And it's those birthday party records were the first records we had where when we announced it, within 24 hours we had more orders than we had pressings. So that was kind of nice.
That's awesome. And then you've repressed that, I think, a few times over the years. Is that right?
That is correct, and we're doing another round this year.
That's great.
Right? Are they going to be available this year? Dana's kind of in charge of what's going on now.
Probably towards the end of the year.
Okay. Yeah. And so, like, I noticed, yeah, so in those years after 2011, you had kind of fewer new releases, but I according to Discogs, at least, I noticed that there's represses happening kind of every year. So then in 2012, I'm just trying to get my notes in order here. Sure. 2012 was the first Damned release, I believe, Machine Gun Etiquette.
Yes, that was through a licensing company that owns rights in England they were called Ace. I think they're called something else now. But it was that, yeah, the deal was for Machine Gun Etiquette and the first Motorhead record.
Gotcha. So like so the first Motorhead record came out a couple years earlier. So like did that sort of come up when you initially, so I guess Motorhead is why you first contacted them?
We had tons of problems with the initial pressing of the Machine Gun Etiquette. That's why it was delayed.
I see.
The problem, it turned out, and I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I'm going to. We were getting the high quality mastering that we wanted, but we were not getting the high quality pressing that we knew could be done. And so I can't remember what the deal was with RTI, but for whatever reason, we didn't consider RTI viable. Maybe they had a backlog and it would take too long, or maybe they weren't taking on new projects at that time. I can't remember what it was, but we were at Rainbow, and we were consistent.
Famously problematic, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, we got one. I think we got one record or one set of pressings where it was warped, and it was just like, how could you send this out with a good conscience? And they came back at us and said, oh, that's just something we like to call the rainbow bump. It's to be expected.
Oh my God.
And so we kind of put a halt on it and went with another. I can't remember where we initially pressed that. We might have ended up, I know we sent around a whole pressing back to Rainbow, and they might have done it again and done a better job, but then I think we left Rainbow altogether after that. Anyway, that's kind of the story behind that initial pressing.
Gotcha. And then I noticed a mastering engineer you worked with quite a bit early on too was Alex DeTurk at Masterdisk.
He was.
Yeah, like I've got other things that he's done too, like a Bob Mould album and several other things, and I think he's really good. Like, is he somebody you sought out, or how did that relationship come about? Do you know?
Yeah. So Masterdisk was somebody who was recommended to us around the same time as Kevin Gray, and so we called up. God, what was that guy's? Jim Hall or Scott Hall on Masterdisk. Anyway, when we got there, we said we wanted, the most fastidious, best master they had, and Alex is all of that. He was absolutely fantastic. He had a vision for the way he wanted things to sound. One thing he would do that Kevin doesn't, and they're just different styles. Like Kevin's so really seasoned and experienced and good at his job. You need to discuss anything with him. No, he's but not having had that reputation, he would call and go over in detail exactly what his vision was, what he wanted to do with the tapes, what he was doing. So we were super happy with Alex, and I think we only stopped using him altogether because we stopped with Masterdisk. I can't remember what the circumstances were. He left, and I don't know if Masterdisk was going through some sort of upheaval at that time. I sort of think they were, but it was primarily because he left that we ended up going pretty much exclusively with Kevin.
Gotcha. Yeah, I noticed you're using Kevin more and more over the years. So 2012, the first Damned, and then 2013, another birthday party, Angry Samoans.
That was a deal with Greg from the Angry Samoans. He's a lot of fun, and that band's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that was a very good seller too.
Oh, great. I kind of wondered about that. I was afraid to ask in case it was a bad seller, but I'm glad to hear that they can sell a lot of records nowadays too.
Yes, we went back at them to do another repressing, and they are going to do it actually through someone else. So you can look forward to the new ones coming out.
Gotcha. And then 2014 is when things seem to really explode. Another Damned album, Mott the Hoople, All the Young Dudes, the Cramps, the Plasmatics, another Angry Samoans, David Johansen, and then where did I put it? Oh, Circle Jerks. So just I can't resist but mention with Mott the Hoople, you'll never guess who I'm named after. Few people ever guess this correctly, but with Mott the Hoople coming up, yeah, I'm named after Ian Hunter. My dad was a big fan.
In our bar, our Drastic Plastic vinyl lounge, where we sell records and booze, and we have a mural across our bar, and we have Ian Hunter on there, and nobody can get. He's the one that nobody gets. Nobody gets that. Ian Hunter. I think he's sandwiched in between Susie and Lou Reed or something, and everybody thinks it's Robert Plant.
Late era Robert Plant, yeah. So let's see. So Circle Jerks, do you have any sort of story about how that came about?
So that was again, let me think. we reached out. Joe Sofio is their manager. And so he's the guy we reached out to. I think it was just a blind call based on some information, maybe on a website or something. But Drastic opened in '82, as you pointed out, and there wasn't a bigger hardcore band in that era than the Circle Jerks. So Circle Jerks were always close to our heart. And Keith is a fun, decent guy, although he made fun of me when we brought him here. So I have mixed feelings about him, on stage. So we developed the deal to do the second and third records. The first one was at that time was still at Frontier, and then we also did a T-shirt deal with them too. So we were all in with the Circle Jerks, and they recently severed that deal to, I think, develop their own company, and I think they're doing it themselves now.
Gotcha. I noticed there's like a 40th anniversary of Wild in the Streets that came out on another label, at least.
Yeah. So, but it was a fantastic relationship. We had it for quite a long time, and right after we struck the deal, we brought what's the name off here. So Keith and they did sort of our 30th anniversary.
Oh, cool.
Was it the 30th? Yes, the 30th anniversary. So that was a ton of fun, and the Off guys are the biggest sweethearts in the world.
I like them a lot. Mario Rubalcaba is one of my favorite drummers too. He's awesome.
Yes, Mario is probably, of the sweethearts, he's the biggest sweetheart.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And then so you mentioned like also doing a T-shirt deal at the same time with the Jerks. Does that help sweeten the deal with bands by saying, hey, we got this T-shirt shop too, by the way, we could do a whole thing?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, it's always a crapshoot on how well the T-shirts are going to sell. And the T-shirt side of our business has grown so enormously. We've actually sort of outgrown the small bands. Our biggest licenses now are actually Marvel and Star Wars.
Wow.
And, like Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix and like major tier things. So a lot of our old contracts, it's just like the people who want those kinds of T-shirts tend not to want the Circle Jerks or the Dwarves or the UK Subs or GBH or all of these ones we've had for decades that are close to our hearts, but they just don't sell anymore. At least at the numbers we have to do in order. You can't stop several thousand piece run to Urban Outfitters for Star Wars to do 14 GBH shirts,
Yeah, like I think that sounds like it really mirrors like pressing plants. You look at like RTI and QRP, how they used, how QRP used to do all the Hendrix, for example, and all this stuff, but they've grown their own stuff so much that they really just can't make space for that kind of stuff anymore. Or some smaller band who wants to do a high quality pressing of 1,000 or whatever. It's just not really realistic anymore through them, at least.
It's a shame. And we loved Gary, who went from RTI to QRP and was there at the beginning for QRP and was a huge reason we went there. Plus, we can actually drive there without too much time. I mean, you live in this area, so you know how close they are. And Gary figured out how to make the perfect sounding vinyl. I swear to God that I think QRP vinyl sounds under Gary's direction sounds the absolute best of anything I've ever heard, even superior to RTI. But you can't get in there now. I mean, they're probably booked for the next 10 years. I'm being hyperbolic a bit, but
no, but it's correct though, I think. Yeah. Okay, how are we doing? We've been at about a half hour here. I'm looking for I got one more note card of notes. There it is. So yeah, 2014 was a big year. A lot of new stuff. 2015, Ministry, Love and Rockets.
Yes. Turner Brothers and 4AD/Beggars. I guess Beggars Group is the name of the thing. I love working with Beggars. They continue to have their independent spirit. A lot of the people who were there at the inception were there for while we were doing business with them, and they were all really fantastic. 1 second. I gotta stop. All right. How do I do this, Dana?
I think just click on it again.
Should I hit pause on my end on the recording?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay,
While I
I'll
just
pause it.
figure this.
Okay, we're back. Technical difficulties averted. All right, then in 2016, so you'd already put out a couple of damned records at that point, and then in 2016 you put out the first damned record. I'm just curious why didn't this come out first, for example? Like, was it a different record label, or like,
Yeah, it was.
that's
The
all it
damned
came down to?
stuff scattered throughout. We actually had a band or a t-shirt contract with the band as well. But that third record, Machine Gun Etiquette, was on Ace, as I said. I think the fourth record was too, right? Blackout? Yeah, that was through Ace as well. But the first two are BMG. So it was a deal with BMG, and it took us a while to get anything licensed with BMG because they were in transition too. I don't remember exactly how now, but the dissemination and then reacquisition as it was broken apart of EMI effect. So when we were finally able to get a meeting with BMG America, and then it turned out that England was the one who was doing the licensing, we were able to get those first two damned records. And that first one's my favorite. The third one's my close second favorite, but the first one's my favorite. We were super excited.
I've actually never explored the rest of the catalog. I've been tempted so many times to get your other damned releases. I've never pulled the trigger, but that first one is I've loved that one for a long time.
The first five are fantastic. Probably the weakest one is maybe the second one, and then maybe the fourth one, but Strawberries, the fifth one, is fantastic. The third one, I think, rivals the first one. And the fourth one is really good too, but it's really that whole other side with the live material is kind of weird.
Gotcha.
A fantastic band. We're now going on tour with Blondie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I thought just before the pandemic, I thought I saw some mutterings about the first album lineup doing some shows or something like that.
Right.
Is that what it's going to be with Blondie? Do you know, or?
I think it is going to be the original lineup. I don't know that for sure. I know that Rat, there was a falling out with Rat, famous falling out, because I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I think he licensed some stuff without the other band's approval, and they took that as a real betrayal. And so they didn't even speak forever. So Andrew Pinching from English Dogs did the drumming for years, and I know he's not doing that because he stopped by the bar when Flogging Molly went through. He's now drumming for Flogging Molly. So Andrew's not drumming, so my assumption is that Rat will be, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I thought I saw some videos at some point of that, like Rat was playing with Brian James.
Yes, do that. I remember that. Yeah. So fantastic, super incredible drummer, Rat Scabies.
Totally. I mean, at the same time, that record's getting to be close to 50 years old. The idea of being able to replicate that at an advanced age, I'd be curious to see how I was able to do that. So that was 2016. Oh yeah, and so then 2017, then the Muffs' first record.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting is, did I bring that with? Yes, I brought that with me. Their second record came out on Omnivore a year earlier, also cut by Kevin Gray, and I've long sort of speculated that like maybe they were both supposed to cut out on one label, but then it didn't work out. Or do you know anything about that? Why you guys put out the first record and Omnivore put out the second record?
We always, the only answer I have to that is that I think we both went after it. I don't know what Omnivore's relationship is with Warner Brothers, but based on our relationship at Warner Brothers, we had that title licensed for a while, and I think we were in a long queue. And we were reluctant to license the entire catalog because we just weren't sure how it was going to do.
Yeah.
So it did fantastically, way better than our expectations. There's a huge fan base for the muffs that I wasn't aware of, and maybe that's just because I'm in my 50s. If I was in my 40s, maybe I'd understand the grassroots appeal of the muffs better. But then Omnivore came in and got all the rest, the second, third, and fourth, I think, or maybe the second and third. And because we went back wanting them, and they were like, nope.
Gotcha.
So I think it's just a matter of that. Like, you go after licensing things, and there's lots of people doing it, and ultimately it's the licensing gurus at these major labels that are that make those decisions based on I don't know what.
And then has that changed over time? Has it become more difficult to license stuff for vinyl reissues compared to 2010, just because of how much vinyl has exploded in the last few years?
Absolutely. Some of those classic rock titles, and maybe some of the larger, with the new wave of hip hop and waves of hip hop and R&B, and their foray into insisting on doing physical product has become so gargantuan that the deals have just gotten harder to make. I mean, when you want to do Suicide Commandos, and Sony's like, okay, all our new deals have to be at least 5,000 pieces with a multi-$1,000 advance. You can't do it. I mean, I just don't. I love the Suicide Commandos. I don't know how long it would take to sell 5,000 copies of it.
I definitely would buy a Suicide Commandos reissue, but yeah, I'm one guy. Okay, so then 2018, then Hanoi Rocks, Girls Against Boys, and then 2019 and 2020, I didn't see any new reissues from Drastic Plastic outside of represses. And then last,
that was COVID. I guess COVID factored into it in 2020, but at that point, you were really starting to see the difficulty in trying to get into pressing plants.
Yep.
So we
just kind of squeezed out, basically.
Record store day factors into that too. And so particularly us, I mean, we were pretty much exclusive with QRP. We had to diversify. I think it was with Hanoi Rocks and the Muffs that we started to go. Those were done at Furnace. So anyway, all of these things were issues that sort of factored into our slowdown. And in addition, when we could get things in, we needed to do things like cramps. We needed to repress cramps. We needed to repress a lot of things. So
this thing, your back catalog had gotten so large at that point that represses probably take up a lot of capital, basically.
Yeah. And you get, and like I was saying, at that point, it was just starting to creep into the area where we were unable to just do what we wanted whenever we wanted. We had to get in line like everybody else at that point.
Yep.
At the plants and stuff like that. So the demise of Rainbow, even though I didn't like using them, that was a larger factor than I think people give credit toward in slowing everybody else down. I mean, they were the biggest.
Yeah.
And they were the cheapest. And so a lot of the major label stuff went through Rainbow.
Yep.
Like the Beatles, for example, went through Rainbow. Those initial Beatles reissues.
Yeah, and a ton of Rhino reissues used to go through Rainbow in the aughts. And so then in 2021, it looks like you started kind of like a big series of King Gizzard live albums.
Yeah, no royalties.
Yeah, so what can you tell me about, like, how did that all come to be?
Why don't you explain the bootleg thing, Dana? Dana's been here for all of King Gizzard, and she is intimately familiar with the process on King Gizzard.
I saw an article, I think it was actually on Reddit, that King Gizzard was doing this bootlegger series. And so I sent it to Mike and Neil, and I was like, should we do these? And they don't ask for any royalties. They just ask that you send them some copies of what you make. So I thought that was really nice. I felt like we could bulk up our catalog a little bit because it was getting a little thin. Things were selling out, and getting licenses is difficult, and waiting for stuff from the pressing plants. And then
so interesting. So like what's the sourcing on? So like are you getting soundboard recordings? Are you getting stuff from people who are attending shows and sending it to you, or what are you getting for those?
It's actually just straight from their website.
Oh, really?
Figure page, and then they give you all the information. You just have to get you just have to download like uTorrent and download everything, and they give you like all the artwork, even though you can do whatever you want. You can even like take songs from different albums and put it all together. And they just ask that they just get some copies to sell for themselves.
No way. I've never heard of such a thing. That seems like a pretty unique arrangement.
Yeah, and it's cool to be able to like be creative with the process, because sometimes licensing can be very expensive. So we're getting more creative with what we do with them. And it's really nice. And I really like the King Gizzard fan base. Like, they're so diverse, and their music is really diverse. So they're just a cool band to work with.
And they sell. That's one of the biggest things is we did the first couple and they immediately sold out as soon as we announced them. And so we're like, we should be in the King Gizzard business.
Can you disclose how many pieces you're pressing on those?
I don't, it's not a secret. I mean, most of them are 500 piece runs. And I think our deal on them is we do them as inexpensively as possible, because that's like the one thing nobody else was doing, because anybody can press these records for free. Nobody doesn't, as long as you have the money to pay the production fees. So we did them very inexpensively, and then we come back and we do something wildly creative. And both runs are generally 500 pieces a piece, unless the expense of our creativity is so high that we need to do 1,000 in order to sort of spread those costs over more records.
Gotcha. And the ding on the phone or whatever seems to be right next to the microphone. It's super loud on my end, that ding.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So how many, it's quite a few, right? Do you know about how many different releases you've done with them now?
Probably about, oh gosh, I can't remember. There's turn it on silent.
Okay.
I think at least like 10.
Yeah.
Like, there's several live albums, and then like Teenage Gizzard and Polygon One Land and demos. Those are like, comps, and Polly's an album, but yeah, several live albums.
Okay, we're back. More technical difficulties, but we're back. Okay, so that was King Gizzard. And so in talking leading up to our conversation, I think, Neil, you had mentioned there's maybe another Damned reissue coming out, or what can you tell me about what's coming up in the future?
Yeah, so Damned did yet a third licensor for the Damned. They did their major label release with, albeit without the captain, but maybe their most famous record, at least at that point in the 80s, it was because of its major label release, Phantasmagoria. And actually had a lot of MTV play, and really at the time brought them to a much wider audience. So we have a lot of hopes for this one. It has not been out on vinyl except for when it originally came out. And so we're super excited about that. And it's a Kevin Gray project, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So super excited about it.
Sounds really good.
And it's actually been QRP for over a year. That's what we've been dealing with.
Oh wow! So if it hadn't been for those delays, you may have even had it out already.
Yes.
No kidding. So you just
all of the Gizzard stuff is done through Pirates Press, which is they're Pirates Press in the United States, but they use GZ in the Czech Republic.
Gotcha.
That's where all the so that's we do have a lot of things in the works. It's the King Gizzard thing has sort of been what we've been doing while we're waiting for all this other stuff.
Is the other stuff anything you can talk about, or is that you have to kind of keep your mouth closed about that for now?
Well, one of them was the Johnny Thunders reissue, which was at QRP for so long it sold out almost immediately. We're almost sold out. We're not quite there.
Got like 100 left.
Yeah.
Out of
So
1,000.
that was fantastic. One of our pride and joys, the Johnny Thunders record. What else we got in the waiting down there?
QRP?
Yeah, another Cramps release,
Flame
right?
Job.
Flame Job
Oh, great.
Standard issue.
is down there. And Anything else?
Well, they're just toads, but
Yes. No, we can. The Cramps' Gravest Hits reissue.
Mhm.
So I think those are all things we've been waiting on that we really anticipated having in 2021.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah, so it sounds like when we talked leading up to our conversation today, I had the impression that maybe you had just sort of like completely stopped with the kind of stuff you had done in the past, but it sounds like that's not the case. You're still doing it, maybe just not at the rate that you had done in the past, but you still have.
Absolutely, we're doing a new we're doing a repressing of Joy Division, the live record that we do.
Yeah.
Preston, right?
yes.
And we're actually, our company, the t-shirt side, is the exclusive North American licensing agent for New Order and Joy Division. So if you see a New Order or Joy Division t-shirt, that goes through us. So we're super proud of that as well. We are that also for the Velvet Underground. So that was that relationship was instrumental in getting that Preston record. So that'll be coming. Then we're doing some a couple of sort of under the radar favorites, the first two Alien Sex Fiend records, which I'm sure will be massively great sellers. And what else?
Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry,
Yeah.
talk about the weather.
Yes.
Pop will eat itself, Box Frenzy, which should be here this week.
Yeah.
I
don't know, but we're going to be doing something that's in the hopper that will be coming out with our 3 later Buzzcocks records. So
really?
we're excited about that too. Yeah, not the original stuff, which is all in print, I believe, but the self-titled one from around 90, 91, and a couple of ones after that we think are very good, but clearly aren't considered, the creme de la creme of Buzzcocks titles.
Yeah, I've never heard that stuff. I'd be curious to hear it. One last thing I want to ask you about, which I'm kind of nervous about, because I learned from Kevin Gray that the whole topic of sourcing can be a super sticky one. So I'm one of those geeks that loves to see things cut from analog tape, and I know that some of your releases have been cut from analog tape and some haven't. And I'm not going to like press you on which ones yes and which ones no. But I guess what I'm curious about though is just sourcing in general. In general, you've gotten really high quality sources for your releases. When you have been able to get tapes, like how hard has that been to do? Like, do you have to like really sort of like bend their arm to get them to release tapes, or what can you tell me about that?
It depends on who it is. You don't really have to bend. If it's a major label, you don't really have to twist their arms. What you need to do is pay them a lot of money. Major labels, it's always about the money. And we found in working with Kevin that if something is going to be like several $1,000s in order to get our hands on those tapes, a high-res digital transfer gives them, and Alex was this way too, they actually, I don't want to speak for them, but it seems as though they are perfectly willing to work with those and feel confidently that they get the same sort of audio bang for what they're doing. So it's the exact sound from the original tapes without having to pay that several $1,000 fee when that's what's required. That's sort of a workaround we've been able to do with the major labels in order to keep the costs reasonable. Now, with a lot of the independents, they just don't have them. And Universal Fire, so there's a lot of Universal titles, they don't have them either.
Yep.
So when you don't have them, you just do what you can do. Like our Wild in the Streets, Circle Jerks, they strongly felt, Greg Hetson felt that, am I getting that right? Greg Hetson?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying it wasn't Keith. I think it was Greg.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Was insisting that we do whatever we could to capture the sound that they initially recorded for the vinyl. because when they did the CD, they did it differently, and then those tapes were lost or destroyed. So the only recordings they had were either the vinyl or the CD, and the vinyl he felt deeply was superior. So I think it was Alex, I can't remember who did it, but we actually mastered that from the original vinyl. And that was an incredibly expensive process in order to get the audio that needed to be. But we were proud of it when it came out.
I think it's really cool that
I took it.
I think we're starting to get hiccups again, but I think it's really cool that you did that. That's something I've kind of mused about in the past, is that like, instead of using some crappy digital source, why not do a rip of an original cut and clean that up? Like, you could, a high reg rip of an original record is sometimes better than some crappy digital.
Yes, it can be. It's incredibly expensive to get it that way, though, which I think is the reason a lot of more people don't do it.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you say that about cost when it comes to cutting from tape, because like, you know, I've just long wondered, like, there are certain albums where I had this happen to know there are tapes out there. Like, there's been one edition done from a tape and then another edition not done from a tape, and I just kind of ripped my hair out thinking, like, just do it from the tape. Why don't you do it from the tape? And I didn't realize that it might be a lot more expensive actually to cut it from tape.
It is. It's not a blanket rule across the board, but a lot of times it is.
Gotcha. Yeah, and especially if you're like, you know, I don't know specifically how big of budgets you're working with, but like, you know, it's not a major label budget in any case, and so you got to do what you got to do.
I think you're going to see with the rights reverting law that is coming into effect. Well, the result of that law is coming into effect now for so many of the punk and post-punk bands. They're getting their rights back. What generally is sort of lost on the general public when they're considering this problem, for those in the general public who actually consider it, is the fact that those major labels, if they were originally on a major label, they are never going to give up those tapes or the original artwork. So that's why you're seeing a lot of people re-recording their music again. There's been that, and where they have the rights, the intellectual property, but they can't get the tapes any cheaper than we can. And those major labels, they don't work. They don't have souls. I mean, everybody knows that, right? So I'm sure a band like that does well, like maybe Blondie or the Cars or B-52s, who had some next level success, maybe they can afford to buy back their tapes, but there's a lot of bands who can't.
I wonder if that's like, for me, one huge gaping hole in the reissue world is Throwing Muses. That stuff has just never been reissued, and I wonder if maybe some of what you're talking about is part of the picture. I can only speculate, of course, but I'd never really thought of that angle before.
Yeah, if they are on that, you have to apply publicly through the government to get your rights back, and you can go look at that. And if a band is in the process of getting their rights back, you don't want to touch them with the 10-foot pole, because they can stop you. The minute they get it back, they can stop you from selling. So, yeah, you got to wait till they get it and do a deal with them, or make sure that they're not on the list.
Gotcha.
It's weird.
Yeah.
In theory, I'm all for artists getting back their rights and being able to monetize it so that they can. Most of these people are getting towards retirement age, and they probably could use a fresh influx of money for their retirement. And theoretically, I'm all for that, but in practical terms, it's not going to be that easy for them.
Okay, well, we're getting close to an hour here, and I don't want to press my luck with more technical difficulties. So maybe we can kind of leave it at that, unless anything you'd like to add.
No, but thank you very much for having us. Ian, you have anything you want to add?
Just shop at your local record store.